There's a version of Hollywood history that glitters. It lives in black and white photographs, in red carpet footage, in the carefully curated memories of studio publicists who spent their entire careers making sure the truth never reached the front page. For generations, audiences accepted that version without question. The stars were gods. The studios were temples. And whatever happened behind closed doors stayed there, buried under contracts, cash payments, and carefully engineered silence. Ron Howard grew up inside that world. As a child actor on The Andy Griffith Show and later Happy Days, he watched the machinery of fame operate from the inside. He saw how reputations were built, how scandals were smothered, and how the industry protected its most valuable assets regardless of what those assets had done. When Howard eventually became one of Hollywood's most respected directors, winning the Academy Award for A Beautiful Mind in 2002, he carried those memories with him. And over the years, in interviews, reflections, and candid conversations, he has spoken with rare honesty about the darker figures who shaped the golden age he inherited. What follows is drawn from those accounts. 6 actors. 6 legacies stained by cruelty, violence, exploitation, and moral failure. Howard has never framed these revelations as gossip. He has framed them as a reckoning. Because understanding where Hollywood came from, he believes, is the only honest way to understand where it must go. Long before the term predator entered Hollywood's vocabulary, Errol Flynn was living proof that fame could function as a shield against consequences. Flynn arrived in Hollywood from Tasmania in the early 1930s and transformed almost immediately into the industry's most electrifying leading man. Captain Blood, The Adventures of Robin Hood, The Seahawk. Film after film reinforced the image of a man born for adventure, born for glory, born to be loved by audiences everywhere. The reality was considerably uglier. Flynn's private life was defined by a reckless disregard for the boundaries and dignity of others, particularly women and girls. In 1942, 2 teenage girls brought accusations of statutory rape against him, igniting a trial that consumed the nation's attention for months. Warner Brothers mobilized its legal and financial machinery on his behalf. Witnesses reportedly became difficult to locate. Flynn, for his part, appeared to treat the proceedings as an inconvenience, conducting himself in court with the breezy confidence of a man who had never seriously considered that accountability might apply to him. He was acquitted. What emerged in later decades, through private correspondence and biographical research, painted a portrait of a man who viewed the world as existing purely for his own gratification. Ron Howard, reflecting on Flynn's legacy, described the 1942 trial as the moment he first understood a sobering truth, that the Hollywood system had been specifically designed not to produce art, but to protect investment. Flynn was an investment. The teenagers who accused him were not. The math was that simple and that devastating. Flynn died in Vancouver in 1959, age 50, his body destroyed by decades of alcohol abuse, drug dependency, and a lifestyle that brooked no moderation. His films remain. But Howard has been clear. Those films belong to audiences, not to the man who made them possible. Flynn's charm was real. It was also, for those who encountered the person behind it, a form of danger. Kirk Douglas transformed himself from Izer Danilovich, the son of impoverished Russian immigrants in upstate New York, into one of the most forceful screen presences in cinema history. His performances in Champion, Ace and Hole, Paths of Glory, and Spartacus established him as an actor of tremendous ability and ferocious commitment. He was also, by most accounts of those who worked alongside him, a profoundly difficult and at times frightening human being. Crew members from multiple productions described Douglas as a man who wielded his star power not to elevate the work, but to control everyone around him. His explosions of temper were sudden and total. People who displeased him were humiliated publicly, often without warning. Director Stanley Kubrick, who worked with Douglas on Paths of Glory and navigated their partnership on Spartacus with considerable tension, reportedly described him as one of the most formidable forces he had ever encountered on a film set, and not always in ways that served the production. But the most serious accusations surrounding Douglas concern events far graver than a difficult temperament. In the years following the death of actress Natalie Wood, and more explicitly in his sister Lana, Wood's 2018 memoir, allegations emerged that Douglas had assaulted Natalie Wood when she was 16 years old. No charges were ever filed. The story, like so many stories of that era, have been effectively contained by the industry's machinery of silence for decades before it surfaced publicly. Ron Howard has spoken carefully but unambiguously about what Douglas's career represents. The talent was real, Howard has acknowledged. The achievements were real. But talent and achievement, in Howard's view, do not constitute a defense against accountability. When Douglas received an honorary Academy Award in 1996, many in the audience saw an elderly man making peace with his industry. Howard saw something more complicated. A system congratulating itself for how thoroughly it had managed a story it should never have been permitted to manage in the first place. Faye Dunaway's brilliance is not in question. Her work in Bonnie and Clyde, Chinatown, Network, and 3 Days of the Condor constitutes one of the most extraordinary runs of performance in American film history. She understood the camera with an almost scientific precision, and she brought an intelligence to her roles that elevated every production she touched. She also, by extensive and consistent account, made the lives of those around her genuinely miserable. Crew members, assistants, makeup artists, directors, and co-stars from multiple productions described a pattern of behavior that went far beyond the ordinary demands of perfectionists. Dunaway reportedly threw objects, screamed at technicians over minor infractions, and treated subordinates as having no rights worth respecting. During the filming of Mommy Dearest, a production already centered on the psychology of abuse, multiple members of the crew noted with grim irony that the atmosphere Dunaway created on set was disturbingly consistent with the atmosphere the film was depicting. Director Frank Perry, who worked with her on that production, later spoke of considering abandoning the film entirely because of her behavior. Other directors, over the course of Dunaway's career, quietly added her name to lists of performers they would not work with again. The accumulation of that reputation eventually took its toll. By the 2000s, the offers had thinned dramatically. By the 2010s, she was being fired from stage productions rather than headlining them. Ron Howard has cited Dunaway as a cautionary study in what happens when the industry, in its eagerness to protect profitable talent, fails to impose any meaningful consequence on destructive behavior until the damage has spread across decades of other people's careers and well-being. The tragedy, in Howard's framing, is not Dunaway's eventual isolation. The tragedy is the 20 years of suffering that preceded it, suffered not by Dunaway but by the people who worked for her. John Wayne was not merely a movie star. He was a cultural ideology rendered in human form. The persona he projected across more than 200 films, stoic, uncompromising, physically fearless, morally absolute, told Americans a story about themselves that millions found deeply comforting. The fact that Wayne himself had avoided military service during World War II while playing soldiers and had never spent significant time in the Western landscapes he supposedly embodied was detail that the mythology simply did not accommodate. What the mythology also did not accommodate was the ugliness of Wayne's actual views. His 1971 interview with Playboy magazine, which resurfaced and circulated widely in later decades, stands as one of the most explicit documents of the racial contempt that animated a significant portion of Golden Age Hollywood. Wayne's statements about Native Americans, about Black Americans, about the Civil Rights Movement, and about what he considered the appropriate hierarchy of human dignity are not ambiguous and cannot be softened by context. They reflect a man who had constructed an identity around a vision of America that required the exclusion and diminishment of most of the people who actually lived in it. On film sets, Wayne operated through intimidation. Technicians who made errors were dressed down publicly. Actors who challenged his authority were frozen out. He carried his ideology into his working relationships. Indigenous performers on Western productions were treated with open contempt. Female colleagues were belittled. Anyone who represented cultural change was viewed as an enemy. Ron Howard has been direct about what Wayne's legacy actually demonstrates. The myth of John Wayne, Howard has suggested, is a myth that America constructed partly because it needed to avoid looking at what the myth was covering. Wayne's genuine screen presence was real, but presence, in Howard's view, is not character. And the character behind the presence was one that caused harm to real people and provided ideological cover for systems of prejudice that caused harm to many more. In March 1977, Roman Polanski was arrested for the sexual assault of Samantha Gailey, a 13-year-old girl, at a home in Los Angeles. The evidence was overwhelming. Polanski pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of unlawful sexual intercourse with a minor before his sentencing could be completed. He fled to France, where he has remained beyond the reach of American extradition ever since. Hollywood's response to the sequence of events has been, for Ron Howard, one of the most revealing and damning episodes in the industry's history. Polanski continued directing